Hey friends, it is Vince, and it's time for, you guessed it because you clicked play and listened to the episode, it's time for an RR show. We got a couple of stories, a couple of good ones. First one's going to be from ProRevenge, second one from PettyRevenge. But first, let's start this episode and get into it right now. This first story is posted by Anonymous under ProRevenge. Neighbor was stealing water from my supply, so I ruined him. I live in Asia and just purchased a new house. Now, the previous owners were family friends who needed cash urgently and haven't been living in my country for nearly 3 years, so I got it at a great price in the middle of the capital city. The sale was finalized at the start of this month, and I moved in right after. The house was definitely a fixer-upper, as the previous owners had left mid-renovation and the main floor was locked with just a padlock. Not even a door lock. The house had no gate, meaning anyone could just walk right on in. The first day I moved in, someone's bike was parked in the garage. I just parked it on the road on the same day I had a gate installed. An angry man was knocking on my gate later, and I didn't bother answering. But through my window, I could see him giving up and taking the bike after 15 minutes. So I already wasn't digging the neighborhood, but I didn't have any incidents after that, aside from people not knowing that this was no longer an abandoned house. So my gate was blocked more often than never, but a no parking sign on my gate fixed that issue. Last week, I was having a shower in my bathroom, and I noticed my water pressure was lower than usual. I also heard my next-door neighbor's water pump going. Now, this neighbor, an old guy, lived in a 3-storied house, the first being the lowest and the one he lived in. The other 2 floors were rented out to tenants. The guy wasn't happy about the house being sold and voiced many concerns to my friends, the previous owners. He was super angry about it, and my friends did warn me, but I'm a 6-foot guy with 3 dogs. No way he was doing anything, and yeah, he didn't. So with this living situation, a water pump is needed to pump water to the tanks on the roof, since the public supply's water pressure is not enough to get it up 3 stories. Now, I heard the water pump going and immediately was suspicious. Sure, coincidences exist, but it wouldn't hurt to check it out. I waited till his pump turned off and then turned on different taps in the house. Sure enough, the pressure was back to normal. This made me even more suspicious. But if he was stealing water, it also made sense. The water bills had been going up over the years this house wasn't lived in, but the house also had some water leaks. So it was chalked up to that, even if the bills were too high to be caused just by leaks. Now it's starting to make more sense. At some point in the last 3 years, this old miser thought he'd save the cost of paying for water and waltzed into the property and is siphoning water from my lines. I couldn't find exactly where he was siphoning water from, but after checking my pressure multiple times, I was pretty sure. I sat on it for a few days, thinking if I should confront him, go the legal path, or just let it be. Now, water in my country is very cheap. My total bill, even with washing 3 animals, a car every week, and watering my garden, only costs like $5 a month, even with the neighbor also stealing some of it. But it wasn't about how much I was paying or who was paying for it. It's about entitled old people who think that they're deserving of other people's resources without paying for it, and then getting away with it. It didn't sit right with me, and I really wanted to teach him a lesson. What I did was really simple. I just turned off my water from the mains. I wouldn't have to break into his property, nor would I be breaking any laws. It was the best way of getting back at him without needing to even lift a muscle. So on Monday, just 4 days ago, I waited till the pump flicked on and turned off the supply. Now, the way household tanks work in my country is that there's a ball valve in the tank which detects the level of water and turns on the pump. If the level doesn't increase, the valve stays open, which electronically sends a signal to the pump to stay on until the level gets to a point at which the valve closes and also shuts off the pump. However, the level wasn't increasing, and anyone knows that starving a pump of water isn't a good idea. This way, my exception was that I'd burn out his pump and cause issues with his tenants. What I didn't account for is that his pump, running constantly, would mess up fuses by constantly drawing power overnight and absolutely destroy his wiring. If he decided to upgrade his household wiring to a more modern standard, this would have been prevented. This house clearly had 90s era wiring. Around 3 a.m., I heard all residents in the house walking around and talking in hushed voices about why their house in the neighborhood just doesn't have power or water. I found out about the power part because the tenants devolved into shouting at their landlord. Our tenant protection laws are very important, and power and water are classed as essential even on a state level. Cutting those services are grounds for lawsuits, unless due to weather or some other unavoidable reason. In this case, the landlord is responsible for keeping the house wiring up to date and in good condition, alongside the supply of water. So the tenants were not happy, and one of them immediately moved out 2 days later when it was informed that the water and power will not be returning the same day this happened. Both tenants in the 2 floors lodged a complaint with the police, and if a person is in clear breach of laws, the police have the authority to fine or penalize the person without a court judgment. It can be challenged in court if the person thinks they were unfairly penalized, but they still have to pay the fines and will only be refunded if and when the court finds that the fines were unlawful. So now the landlord lost both tenants and has to pay a fine of $500, which is a lot of money in our country. He also has to refund the security deposits of both tenants and cannot rent out both until issues are fixed, which will cost him more money. As of right now, he's moving out on Sunday to his daughter's place since he cannot afford to live alone. The tenants were his only source of income, and he's a retired mechanic, so he has no other income. He did find out why the motor kept drawing power, overloading the wiring and burning out. He came by to my gate and asked me if I turned off my water. I said, "Oh yeah, my tank had a new leak on a pipe, and I turned it off till the next day until the plumber came to fix the issue." Y'all, the look on his face. He kept a straight one, but I just know he was holding back. He just said, "Oh, okay," and went back inside. Not sure if he knows I know, but I don't care because he can't do anything. I'm getting a plumber down next week to correct my plumbing and remove any pipes that leave my property. So I got rid of my water issue and a neighbor who could potentially be a pain in the ass by simply flicking a tap off. 2 birds, 1 stone, I'd say. The second and final story of this episode comes from r/PettyRevenge. From Sigzy Zeus. Contractors wouldn't stop calling my phone asking for someone else at a different address than me. For the past year or so, I switched to Verizon and got a new number. I've been getting calls from contractors asking to talk to John, and they say his last name. I say, "That's not me, you have the wrong number." They ask me if I live at his address and if I'd like to get some work done on my property. I tell them I don't live there and I don't own any property. They call almost every day of the week and sometimes even on the weekend. I must have told them 100 times to put me on the do not call list, but as soon as I say, they just hang up the phone. Sometimes they say sure. A few times the caller has been rude and has said things like no matter what I do, they'll keep calling, and that getting unwanted calls is just something that comes with having a phone. Well, this week I started doing something different. When they call and ask me if I'm John, I say, "Yep, that's me." And when they ask if I want some work done, I say I sure do. And they ask me what I'm interested in having done. I told them solar. They asked me what would be a good time to come out. I told them 5. And that's when traffic is the worst. They asked me if my wife would be there. I told them, yeah, she sure would. 5 o'clock rolls around and I get a call from the contractor who says he's been there for 10 minutes and no one is home. I told him I had to go to the store real quick, but I'll be back in 10 minutes. He says, okay. Never heard back from him. The next day comes and no one calls as I'm thinking, hey, that worked well. But the next day, here they go calling my phone again. So this time I told them I wanted the bathrooms done, both of them. They asked when is a good time to come by. I told them 5 o'clock is good. They asked me to confirm the address, which I already had from the previous times they called. So I tell them what they wanted to hear, and they tell me, great, they'll see me later. A couple of hours go by, and they call to confirm the appointment and that my wife will be there. I said she sure will. They asked me what exactly I wanted done, and I told them that I was open to suggestions. Then they asked me when I wanted to get started. I told them pretty soon. 5 o'clock comes and my phone rings, and some guy tells me he is the general manager. He asks when the owners of the home will be home, and I tell him I'm home now. He says, but I have you at a different address, and I tell him, yeah, that's because I have 2 homes. He starts reading off the other address, and I say, yeah, that's me. And then he says, so you don't know who Sandra Hayter is? And I'm like, no. Then he says, are you sure you didn't get too many calls from us and maybe you really didn't want an estimate? I tell him that's exactly what happened, and then I told him over 50 times I'm not John, and that's not my address. And I don't have any property work on. Then he says, so you don't know who Sandra Hayter is? And I'm like, nope. Then he says, are you sure you didn't get too many calls from us and maybe you really didn't want an estimate? I told him that's exactly what happened. And I told him that I told them over 50 times that I'm not John. And that's not my address. And I don't have any property to work on. Then he says what sounds like music to my ears. He says, well, that's why I got you in my office on my desk, because I'm going to make sure we take you off the call list. And I tell him that's great because I asked them to do that plenty of times. Well, we shall see what tomorrow brings. I'll send them to my other, much bigger house that needs more work if they call again. So thanks for being with us. The RR Show is a production of Evergreen Podcasts and Wessler Media. Now, if you'd be so kind, please follow or subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're feeling extra nice, you might as well leave a 5-star review. But for more, visit the website, rrshow.com. That is rrshow.com. I'm your host, Vince. Thank you to my producer, Kevin, and we'll see you next time here on The RR Show.